Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to address a program organized by Bloomberg Television. We take you live to the venue.
I'm pleased to be here today to mark 20 years of Bloomberg's presence in India. During that period, Bloomberg has provided intelligent commentary and incisive analysis of India's economy. It has become an essential part of the finance landscape. Apart from that, I'm grateful for the valuable advice that we have received from Mr. Michael Bloomberg in the design of our Smart Cities program. As a mayor of one of the world's great cities, Mr. Bloomberg has personal insight into what makes a city tick. His ideas have enriched the design of our Smart Cities program. Under this program, we hope to create 100 cities which will become role model for urban development throughout the country. The world expects much from India in terms of contributing the global growth. To the extent that time permits, I would like to place before you my thoughts on how India intends to meet the challenge. I will touch upon three major areas. Firstly, I will discuss India's economic growth. Secondly, I will outline some of the administrative and policy reforms that have created and will sustain that growth. Thirdly, I will elaborate on the aspects of economic development which is of particular importance to me, namely job creation. Experts are unanimous that India is one of the world economy's brightest spots. We have low inflation, a low balance of payments current account deficit, and a high rate of growth. This is the result of good policy, not good fortune. Let me elaborate. Between 2008 and 2009, crude oil prices fell steeply from a peak of $147 per barrel to less than $50. This was a steeper fall than between 2014-15. Yet, in 2009-10, India's fiscal deficit, its current account deficit, and its inflation rate all substantially worse. And this slide was a form of higher base figure for all three. But in 2015-16, all three have improved from a lower base. Many other emerging economies also depend on imported oil. If oil prices were the driver of success, those countries would all be showing similar results. But they are not. We have not been lucky with global trade or growth. Both are low and have not helped us in terms of exports stimulus. We have not been lucky with monsoons or weather. 2015 and 2014 have both been drought years. Drought was compounded by unseasonal hailstorms. Yet, food grain production has remained much higher and inflation much lower than in the last comparable drought year, which was 2009 and 10. For India to be at the top of global growth tables is an unusual situation. Obviously, there are some who find that difficult to digest and come up with imaginative and fanciful ideas to belittle that achievement. The fact is that India's economic success is the hard-won result of prudence, sound policy, and effective management. I will elaborate on some of our policies later, but for now, let me emphasize just one fiscal consolidation. We have made ambitious fiscal targets in each of the previous 2 fiscal years. We have reduced the deficit even while increasing capital expenditure. And the reduction has come despite an unprecedented steep cut in the centre's share of tax revenues in the award of the 14th Finance Commission. For 2016-17, we have targeted a fiscal deficit of 3.5% of GDP. This will be the second lowest level in the last 40 years. Our growth rate is acknowledged at the highest among major economies. There are some who remain confused and have said that the growth rate does not feel right. Perhaps I can be of some assistance to them in reducing the confusion by stating facts and place of feelings. Let us first look at credit. There has been a smart pickup in credit growth after September 2015. Credit uptake between February 2015 and February 2016 increased by 11.5%. The overall fund flow to the corporate sector through equity and borrowings of various kinds, domestic and foreign, has increased in the first 3 quarters of 2015-16 by over 30%. There are some very interesting figures on credit ratings. In 2013 and 2014, the number of firms whose credit rating was downgraded was much higher than those who were upgraded. That has now changed decisively. Upgrades are up and downgrades are down. In the first half of fiscal year 2015-16, for every company getting a downgrade, there were more than 2 companies which received upgrades the best level in recent years. Among firms with low levels of leverage, the situation is even better. Upgrades exceed downgrades by a huge margin. The number of upgrades is 6.8 times the number of downgrades for large firms with low leverage. For medium-sized firms, the ratio is 3.9, and for small firms, it is 6.3. These are exceptionally robust numbers. The only segment showing an increase in downgrades is highly leveraged large firms. The government and Reserve Bank have taken tough action to recover dues from large corporate defaulters. Perhaps the noise from this segment has influenced media perceptions. Moving from credit to investment, net foreign direct investment in the third quarter of the current financial year was an all-time record. But to me, more interesting is the dramatic increase in certain important sectors. In the period from October 2014 to September 2015, FDI in fertilizer was $224 million compared to just $1 million in the period October 2013 to September 2014. In sugar, it was $125 million compared to just $4 million. In agriculture machinery, it doubled to $57 million from $28 million. These are sectors that are closely connected with the rural economy. I am thrilled to see that foreign investment is flowing into this rural economy. In the year up to September 2015, FDI in construction activities showed 360% growth. Computer software and hardware had 285% growth. FDI in the automobile industry grew 71%. This is concrete evidence that the Make in India policy is having effect in employment-intensive sectors. In a difficult global environment for exports, manufacturing output has fluctuated. However, several key subsectors of manufacturing are growing rapidly. Motor vehicle production which is a strong indicator of consumer purchasing power and economic activity, has grown at 7.6%. The employment intensive bearing apparel sector has grown at 8.7%. Manufacturing of furniture has grown by 57% and is suggesting a pickup in sales of flats and houses. Looking towards the future, let me turn to agriculture. In the past, the emphasis has been on agricultural output rather than on farmers' incomes. I've set the objective of doubling farmers' income by 2022. I've laid this out as a challenge, but it is not merely a challenge. With a good strategy, well-designed programs, adequate resources, and good governance in implementation, this target is achievable. And as a large share of our population depends on agriculture, a doubling of farmers' incomes will have a strong benefits for other sectors of the economy. Let me outline our strategy. First, we have introduced a big focus on irrigation with a large increase in budget. We are taking a holistic approach which combines irrigation with water conservation. The aim is per drop, more crop. Second, we are focusing on provision of quality seeds and on efficiency of nutrient use. The provision of soil health cards enables accurate selection of inputs according to the requirements of each field. This will lower cost of production and increase net income. Third, a large portion of the harvest is lost before it reaches the consumer. In perishables, loss occurs in transit. In non-perishable, it happens during storage. We are reducing post-harvest losses through big investment in warehousing, infrastructure, and cold chain. We have greatly increased the outlay for agriculture infrastructure. Fourth, we are promoting value addition through food processing. As an example, in response to a call from me, Coca-Cola has recently started adding fruit juice to some of its aerated drinks. Fifth, we are creating a national agricultural market and removing distortions. A common electronic market platform is being introduced across 585 regulated wholesale markets. We want to ensure that a higher share of the final price goes to the farmer with less going to middlemen. The introduction of FDI in marketing of domestic food products in this budget is with the same objective. Sixth, we have introduced the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. It is a comprehensive nationwide crop insurance program which offers farmers protection from risks beyond their control at an affordable cost. This scheme will ensure that their incomes are protected in times of adverse weather. Seventh, we will increase income from ancillary activities. Partly, this will be through poultry, honeybees, farm ponds, and fisheries. We are also encouraging farmers to use uncultivated portions of their land, especially boundaries between fields, for growing timber and placing solar cells. Through a combination of growth in production, more efficient input use, reduction in post-harvest losses, higher value addition, reduced marketing margins, risk mitigation, and ancillary activities, I am confident we will achieve the targeted doubling of farmers' income. I am happy to note that Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, the Dawn of Indian agriculture, seems to agree. He wrote to me after the budget expressing gratitude for the farmer-centric budget. He welcomed the income orientation given to farming. He went on to say, and I quote, "On the whole, the budget has tried to be as pro-farmer as possible, subject to the limitation of resources. Seeds have been shown for agriculture transformation and for attracting and retaining youth in farming. The dawn of a new era in farming is in sight," unquote. Let me now turn to some of the programs and policies that underpin our growth. As I have said before, my goal is reform to transform. The aim of reform is to transform the lives of ordinary people. Let me start with administrative reforms and our focus on education. In a country like India, resources are scarce while problems are abundant. An intelligent strategy is to optimize use of resources through efficiency in implementation. Mere announcement of policies or so-called policies achieves little. Even more than reform policies, we need transformed execution. Let me illustrate. The National Food Security Act was passed in 2013 but remained without implementation in most of the states. In the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, much of the expenditure was leaking out to touts, middlemen, and the non-poor through expenditure was recorded in the books. We are now implementing the Food Security Act nationwide. We have drastically reduced leakages in the employment guarantee scheme and ensured that money reaches those for whom it is intended. We have focused on creating durable assets that benefit the population rather than the touts. And instead of taking about the virtues of financial inclusion, we have actually completed the task and brought over 200 million people into the banking system. Our record on implementation in general and reduction in corruption in particular is now well understood. So I will be brief. Coal, minerals and spectrum have been auctioned transparently, raising large amounts. Managerial improvements have resulted in elimination of the power shortage, a record high in highway construction per day, and record port throughput. We have a launch in number of new programs across various sectors. Many legacy issues have been solved. The number of stalled projects has declined. The long-closed Dabhol power plant is operational again, thanks to our coordinated efforts. And it's generating power, saving jobs, and avoiding bad debts for the banks. Let me now turn to policy reforms. I have referred to the durable reduction in inflation since this government took office. This is partly attributable to bold measures taken to strengthen monetary policy. Last year, we entered into a monetary framework agreement with the Reserve Bank of India. This year, we have introduced in the Finance Bill amendments to the Reserve Bank of India Act. Under these amendments, the RBI will have an inflation target and will set monetary policy through a monetary policy committee. The committee will have no member from the government. Through this reform, monetary policy will acquire an inflation focus and a level of institutional autonomy unprecedented in major emerging markets and greater than several developed countries. Together with our adherence to the part of fiscal consolidation, this is a testimony to a strong commitment to macroeconomic prudence and stability. Another major policy reform is in the petroleum sector. Under new hydrocarbon exploration licensing policy, there will be pricing and marketing freedom and a transparent revenue sharing methodology. This will eliminate many layers of bureaucratic controls. For ongoing projects which have not been developed, we have also given marketing and pricing freedom subject to a transparent ceiling based on published import parity prices. For renewal of existing production sharing contracts, we have introduced a transparent method involving a flat percentage increase in government profit share. This removes discretion and uncertainty. Parliament has passed the Real Estate Regulation Act, which will go a long way in transforming the real estate market, protecting buyers and promoting honest and healthy practices. Along with the passing of this long-pending bill, we have introduced tax incentives for developers and buyers of housing for the neo-middle class and the poor. The Uday scheme in the power sector has permanently changed the incentive structure for state governments. Ambitious operational targets are backed by credible incentive to perform. Under this scheme, in a phased manner, state governments will have to take over losses of distribution companies and count them against their fiscal deficit target. This imposes a hard budget constraint on the states. It creates a powerful incentive for states to manage the electricity sector efficiently. Already 9 states, accounting for over 40% of the total debt of distribution companies, have entered into memorandum of understanding with the central government. Another 9 have agreed to do so. You are probably aware of this government's sweeping policy reforms in renewable energy. From an average of less than 1,500 megawatts of solar capacity addition per annum, we are moving up to 10,000 megawatts per annum. When I announce a target of 175 gigawatts of renewables as a pillar of our climate change strategy, many were surprised and some were skeptical. Yet, this month, the International Energy Agency has reported that a surge in renewable has already halted global growth in energy-related carbon emissions. Parliament has recently passed a new law on inland waterways which will enable the rapid development of the efficient mode of transportation. This will increase the number of navigable waterways from 5 to 106. Foreign direct investment policy has been transformed by allowing investment in hitherto closed sectors like railways and defense, and enhancing investment limits in insurance and many other sectors. These reforms are already bearing fruits. 2 new locomotive factories involving an investment of over $500 billion are being built in Bihar by GE and Alstom. In insurance, 9,600 crore rupees, approximately $150 million of FDI in 12 companies from leading global insurance has already been approved. We have enhanced the limits for foreign investment in stock exchanges and allowed them to be listed. I'm sure you are aware of the reforms we have undertaken to promote private equity venture capital and an ecosystem for startups. I note that this new economy is the focus of your panel discussions also. Finally, let me turn to the major steps we have taken in the area of generating employment. This is one of my highest priorities. India is a capital scarce, labor abundant country. 8, the corporate tax structure has favored capital intensive production. Tax benefits like accelerated depreciation and investment allowances have created an artificial bias against laborers. Labor regulations have also tended to promote informal employment without social protection rather than formal employment. We have taken two important steps to change this. Firstly, if any firm subject to tax audit increases its workforce, it will get a 30% weighted tax reduction on the extra wage cost for 3 years. Earlier, such a benefit was available only to very few industrial employers and had so many restrictions that it was practically ineffective. It will now cover all sectors, including services, for employees with a salary up to 25,000 rupees per month. Secondly, the government has taken the responsibility for paying pension contribution for 3 years for all new persons enrolling in the employee provident fund. This will apply to those with wages up to 15,000 rupees per month. We expect lakhs of the unemployed and the informally employed to benefit from these initiatives. In a reform to eliminate corruption in government recruitments, we have abolished interviews for lower and middle level positions. They will now be filled on the basis of transparent examination results. You are aware that results of government entrance examinations for engineering and medical colleges are being used by private colleges also. I'm happy to announce one more measure to improve the labor market and benefit the unemployed. The government and the public sector undertakings conduct a number of recruitment examinations. So far, the scores in these examinations have been retained by the government. Hereafter, we will make available the results and the candidate information openly to all employers wherever consent is given by the candidate. This will create a positive externality. It will provide a rich database which can be used by private sector employers as a ready-made and objective sourcing and screening mechanism. It will reduce search costs in the labor market for both employers and the employees. It will enable better matching of candidates from labor surplus areas with jobs in other regions. You may be aware of the spectacular progress of the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana. Over 31 million loans have been sanctioned to entrepreneurs for a total value of nearly $19 billion this year. You will be pleased to know that 77% of these entrepreneurs are women and 22% of them are from the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Even if we assume conservatively that on average each enterprise creates just one sustainable job, This initiative itself amounts to 31 million in new employment. The Stand Up India scheme will also provide 250,000 entrepreneurship loans to women and scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. My government's measures on skill development are well known. In the budget, we also announced two path-breaking reforms in the education sector, which I wanted to elaborate. Our aim is to empower higher educational institutions to help them attain the highest standards. To start with, we will provide an enabling regulatory architecture to 10 public and 10 private institutions so that they emerge as world-class teaching and research institutions. The regulatory framework will be separate from existing structures like University Grant Commission and All India Council for Technical Education. They will have complete autonomy on academic, administrative, and financial matters. We will provide additional resources for the next 5 years for the 10 public universities. This will eventually allow ordinary Indians affordable access to world-class degree courses. This initiative is the beginning of a journey to restore the original mandate of higher education regulators. There should be facilitators and guides driven by norms of self-disclosure and transparency instead of top-down command and control. Eventually, through regulatory reform, we aspire to world-class standards in all colleges and universities. Another initiative is in school education. We have achieved much quantitative progress in access and pupil-teacher ratio. The foundation of today's knowledge economy is the quality of its school leavers. We have now decided that the quality of learning outcomes will be the government's primary objective. Accordingly, we will allocate an increasing share of resources under the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan to quality. These funds will be used to promote local initiatives and innovations to improve learning outcomes. I'm sure all of you who are parents and all of you who are employers will welcome these steps in higher and school education respectively. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we have initiated many steps, many more lie ahead. Some have begun bearing fruits. What we have achieved so far gives me the confidence that with the support of the people, we can transform India. I know it will be difficult, but I'm sure it is doable. And I'm confident it will be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Prime Minister, please do accept this token of our appreciation from everyone at Bloomberg.
तो आप देख रहे थे दिल्ली से सीधे, जहां प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी ब्लूमबर्ग टेलीविज़न की तरफ से अपने विचार व्यक्त कर रहे थे और बता रहे थे कि अर्थ जगत और आर्थिक परिदृश्य से जुड़े उन तमाम विषयों पर उन्होंने रोशनी डाली और उनको जनता के सामने, वहां मौजूद दर्शकों के सामने रखा। फिलहाल